911 operators at Reddit. What is the stupidest reason that someone has ever called? Firefighter here. Here are a few actual calls we have been started to. Popcorn in the eye. Ghost in the attic. Possible smoke in the house. Turns out the caller was crying, which made things blurry, so they thought it was smoke. Adult with leg stuck in laundry chute. Caller dropped a cigarette on the garage floor and didn't know what to do. Fried chicken was too dry. Leg through the floor while on the toilet. As a person who has fallen through a floor before. Yeah, it's kinda embarrassing when you guys had to fish me out. No way for me to get out and they had to strap. Cut the floor and pull me out, lol. Bad times. But good memories. When I worked in the ER, we had a guy come in for a spider bite. Now I know there's plenty of misuse of our M system. And seeing as I live in northern Ohio, the likelihood of this being a medical emergency was incredibly slim. But even if it wasn't, I could at least justify that it would be medical adjacent and someone health illiterate might not know that. However, he didn't come to the ER for treatment of said spider bite. He came to ask our attending if he could still donate plasma for money the next day. Despite the bite, my attending, JC, who had worked in this ER for a very long time and had all the subtlety of a brick through a window, met this man as they were offloading him onto one of our beds. Found out his reason for transport. And said simply, "No. Now get the FCK out of my emergency room." Double quote. The staff really loved JC. Management, perhaps not so much. My cousin is a firefighter and one time went on a rant about the "I've fallen and can't get up" buttons. It was a thing of beauty. The ones I remember were a grandchild liked to push the button and the cable being out. In contrast, a co-worker's mother had a button and stayed on the floor for a couple days because she didn't want to bother anyone. Police dispatch in the UK. Had someone call in because two squirrels were fighting in her back garden. No. We don't arrest squirrels. Double quote. On a similar vein. Had a recent immigrant call. Had a strange and deadly creature in the back garden. On arrival. Turns out to be a hedgehog. Also had woman hysterically call in about a snake in her toilet. Turned out to be Big Pooh. July 1996, a dust storm blew in and at least 20 people called 911 to report aliens. Yes. The dust storm did look exactly like the one in the movie Independence Day that was just released. No. Aliens were not invading. I heard that one day when Los Angeles had a huge power outage, people called the police to report strange purple clouds above them. It was the F-King Milky Way. Those morons didn't pay attention in middle school and thought that they were the only ones in the universe or something. LMAO. Paramedic here. At the height of lockdown in the UK, I was sent to a lady who called for an emergency ambulance as her sex drive was too high. Apostrophe. Also on my list of stupid calls. Guy in his late 30s who burnt his tongue on a baked potato. Someone who has had pain in their knee for 30 years. Decided at 3 AM that this was the time to get it sorted. Close bracket. A man in his 40s who had a nightmare. A guy who thought he might feel unwell later. Man who scratched his testicle in the night with his long fingernail. No blood. I have one for you. What would you expect to see if the alarm says patient bleeding out of nose and ear after accident? Yup. You guessed right. The accident was that she wanted to wear her glasses and was in a hurry because her friend had just arrived and wanted to give her a ride. She quickly picked up her glasses from a table where they lay next to her keys. Glasses got entangled with keychain. The unexpected weight of the keys made the glasses miss their target, so that patient rammed one of the quite straight side pieces into her own nostril. The keys were still flying and the chain was just long enough to let one of them end up in her ear, where it somehow managed to cause a tiny lesion. Patient went to her friend and told her that she had had an accident and now had a bloody nose and ear. Friend remembered her first aid lessons and called the rescue service. Operator checked his boxes and didn't ask a lot of questions as enough boxes were checked. I never had a boring sight in that street. I was the one who had to call 911 for this, but close enough for Reddit. I was working with an idiot who one day took note that if he shot his steel toe boot on the steel toe with a nail gun, that said nail would curve around the steel toe. And this worked out for him for a while till that pesky erosion and metal fatigue thing happened and the nail went through and nailed his foot to a door frame. So being the youngest person on the crew, I got picked to make the call, and that was when I found out that there is no way to express the stupidity such as that without sounding like you are making it up. They did send an ambulance and a few officers, and at first they thought we might have done it to him, but after they did an investigation and looked through our lockers, they found that he was keeping a collection of pics of huge shits that he took, and they just kinda noped out of there. And somehow 20 years later he is still alive and now working as a safety supervisor for a large trucking company. When I was 3 years old, my dad said I could do anything I wanted for my birthday. I took it literally and called 911. Not related to 911 at all. But when I was little as well, around 6, my dad said that any money I found on the floor was mine to keep. So what did I do? I said, okay, walked to his bedroom, grabbed his pants, shook them out, then grabbed his wallet. He thought I'd grab whatever change I found, not his f-king wallet. Lmao. I'm the one who called. I got lost in a hotel in the middle of the night after hooking up with some dude and ended up in their inner courtyard with everything locked. The receptionist told me he couldn't find me and to call the cops. They had to get me out of there. So embarrassing. First thing I did when they picked up was apologize. You needed help. I am reminded of a friend that got scared because the toilet seat was up, which made 0 sense. She pre-typed 911 on her phone and ended up accidentally calling. An officer showed up and walked the house to find that everything was fine. She was embarrassed and the officer explained that this is exactly why the police exist and is just happy that everything is okay. Turns out that her father stopped by while she was out, used the loo, and never said anything. Honestly, it's hard to pick. We get silly calls every day that tie up our lines because people think a personal emergency or inconvenience is a life-death emergency. Here are a few recent ones. Mom turned off the internet because he was failing math class. Wanted us to force mom to turn in the internet. Neighbor's porch light was green and it was not a holiday and they thought this should be illegal. The hooker he didn't pay stole his crackers payment and he wanted to report the theft. There was a burro, wild donkey, in their campsite in the desert and wanted someone to remove it. They ran out of gas on the highway and didn't want to pay the fee to their insurance tow truck. Wanted us to tell the tow truck to gas them up for free. Neighbor was parked crooked in their own driveway and caller wanted them ticketed for unsightly parking. Of course the classic McDonald's is out of chicken nuggets type calls. They ran out of gas on the highway. And X200B. That is a life-death emergency but they called the wrong number. Even worse is that they called for fuel and not the fact they were stopped on a highway. Crazy. I saw on a TV program a woman who stopped on the side of a British motorway because of a minor car problem. Ended up being totaled by lorry driver. It's no joke and something like 40 deaths happen a year because of it. And X200B. That is a life-death emergency but they called the wrong number. Even worse is that they called for fuel and not the fact they were stopped on a highway. Crazy. I saw on a TV program a woman who stopped on the side of a British motorway because of a minor car problem. Ended up being totaled by lorry driver. It's no joke and something like 40 deaths happen a year because of it. This reminds me. My super shitty neighbor once called the cops on me because my porch light is too bright. They showed up. Talked to both him and me and after being told having a motion sensor light on my porch is in fact normal and not illegal, he made a giant plywood box around his and told me he'd take it down when all the lights, there was one, were gone. I work in the ER so I'm on the receiving end of some dumb 911 calls. Most recent was a guy who shows up via ambulance at 1 AM because he twisted his ankle 3 days ago and it still hurts. The medic who brought him in was not amused. Not an operator. But back when I was 20, I was at a party where a girl called 911. I went with my roommate to this party and we both crashed there. At the end of the night, he realized he forgot his contact lenses case at home. So he took a shot glass, filled it with water and put his contacts in. A few minutes later, the girl came into the room and saw the shot glass and downed it thinking it was vodka. When my roommate woke up and told her what she did, she got all panicked and called 911. I passed out before they arrived, so I'm not sure what happened. Obligatory, not an operator. But here in the UK, a guy called the police repeatedly as a UFO was hovering over his house at about the same time every night. The operator asked him to go outside and describe what he was seeing. About halfway through the description, the penny drops and the caller admits that the glowing UFO is quite possibly the moon. Reminds me of when people in Las Vegas overwhelmingly called 911 because there was a weird gigantic glowing cloud over the city at night while there was a power outage. Well, they saw the Milky Way for the first time. I had one call on Thanksgiving that their oven was locked and they could not get their turkey out. It was really busy that night and we instructed them to turn the oven off and we could head over when we could. This happened at my in-laws' house year before last. We had to kick my father-in-law out of the kitchen and I used a coat hanger to break into the oven. Hello? Yes. My cigarettes fell. Full stop. Full stop. What should I do? Full stop. Full stop. No. No fire. It's just sitting there. Double quote. Reminds me of someone I know who dropped a cigarette on their kitchen floor tile. So it didn't burn a hole or anything, and then wouldn't finish it because it was dirty. Like, bro. It's a cigarette. The dirt is the healthiest thing about it. I'm not a dispatcher, but I can imagine the dispatcher thought this would take the cake. I worked on the road for a while and the guy I roomed with was a complete moron. He called 911 to ask if there were any fireworks in town that weekend since it was the 4th of July. He tried to explain to me. It is a public service directory, so as long as you say this is not an emergency they'll be able to answer other questions. Seriously. Dumbest guy I ever met. You should have got him to prove it to you by dialing and saying, "This is not an emergency. What is the number I need to call so I don't have to bother you?" Double quote. My mom was the one that called. It was the middle of the night and just me. I was 15F and her home at the time. Dad out of town. And someone kept ringing our doorbell for 20 plus minimum. We were scared it was someone trying to get us to open the door so they could break in since it was 12 AM. Mom calls 911. Cops come. Turns out it was our neighbor trying to tell us that our garage door was open. The police were just like, "How about you guys exchange cell phone numbers for the future?" Pretty embarrassing. I called once because it sounded like someone was trying to get in and I really didn't want to shoot anybody. It was hailing too. Turned out someone opened our side storm door and unhooked the chain so it was all flying around in the wind. It was too dark and stormy to see well. That light outside was out. And TJ only window on that side of the house was about the size of a car mirror. Probably the dumbest one I got as an EMT was when we got called out to a nursing home for a patient that had been nonverbal for about 7 years. We were dispatched for patient is moaning slightly less than usual. I'm an RN in a nursing home. I once called an ambulance for a patient as she was too happy. This woman was the dictionary definition of miserable, so when she smiled gleefully and said good morning, my gut instinct told me something was wrong. Her vitals weren't too far from normal, but I didn't like the drastic change in personality. Turns out she'd had a massive stroke and died a few weeks later. Sounds stupid, but I just knew something was wrong. Had an elderly neighbor who called the police a few times a day. The local firefighters said they would have the calls transferred to them from the sheriff's office. Most ridiculous stuff like losing the remote. Outside lights wouldn't come on. Cat scratching at her door, etc. I tried to be polite, but if I walked too close to her grass on the sidewalk she would threaten to call the law on me. Had someone call in screaming that they were on fire. Sounded legit. I've heard a lot of different screams, including another of someone actually on fire. And this one sounded like one of those "I'm actually dying" screams. I tried everything I could to get them to calm down. Stop, drop and roll. Literally anything, but she just kept screaming. When the fire department eventually got there, she calmed down and I was able to hear her tell them that her crotch was on fire after she had sex with her neighbor. Wasn't a 911 operator but worked with all types of emergency management while working command post in the military, and we got notified of all emergency responses. 911 calls, criminal activity, etc. I have many stories of idiots who called, but a couple of them were just f***ing stupid lol. One time during the winter, the cops got a call from a guy on base who got his car stuck in a snowdrift and needed help getting it out. The cops send a car out there to help, and soon as the guy sees them he takes off running. So they chased him down and turns out the dude was drunk. Bluer. 28 I believe. The fucked had called the cops on himself for running into a snowdrift while driving drunk. Then there was another time we received a call from a lady who said she needed our help locating someone who was kidnapped. She said her son is in the Air Force and he was taken on a spaceship that is currently traveling through the multiverse, and she said they were doing experiments on him. I asked her how she was communicating with him since he was traveling through the multiverse, and she said they were communicating with telepathy. She continued to rant on about it for around 30 minutes without us saying another word before she hung up lol. Had a guy call us saying our planes were flying too low over his farm and making all his cows poop and that we needed to stop flying over. Had a military officer call us saying one of our helicopter flew over and shot some green goo at him and he wanted us to tell the pilot fuck you. Double quote. Good times lol, sometimes I miss it. My cousin works as an operator and B really hasn't had any stupid stories. But one time he got a call from a woman who was absolutely livid. Just legitimately hyperventilating and shit. She said that there was a group of terrorists walking around her apartment block and stabbing people. Since this is happening in a tiny Polish town, like 5 police cars show up. It was just some Turkish dude sitting at a bus stop. Firefighter here. I have to. 1. Someone ate a chip and they didn't chew it all the way. So a small piece of the chip scratched their throat on the way down. He wasn't choking. We said drink some water. You'll be fine. But if you really wanna go to the hospital we can. We've all had this happen to us. Double quote. 2. This actually happened 2 weeks ago. At 11:30 PM. Someone called because there was a lot of smoke in the neighborhood. Their neighborhood backed up to a forest, so they were worried it was a forest fire. We find the source coming from someone's backyard. We go back there and the homeowner and his wife were burning all this dead grass and leaves in their backyard. They told us they were trying to cook potatoes. Lo and behold, in this large pile of leaves and dead grass was a box of potatoes. Still in the box. Their oven worked too. This isn't a low-income area. They have money. They weren't even on drugs. Former dispatcher here, and these are some of the ones that stand out. Called to ask what time it is. Wanted someone to pray the rosary with. Wanted hot firemen to come over and sew many things stuck in butts. Bit late to the party. But I am a 911 operator, so I've got that going for me. My personal favorite was the guy that called in because there was a raccoon in a tree in his yard. It should be noted that I dispatch for a low density county and medium density small city. Me. Sir. What is it doing? Is it acting aggressive? Raccoon guy. No. He's just in my yard. Me. Dot. So what is the issue? What do you want done? RG. I want someone to come get it. It shouldn't be here. Me. Sir. Raccoons live in trees. RG. But I live in the city. Not a 911 operator. However, we frequently have patients call 911 from the ER when they don't get what they want. They will call and tell them that they are in pain and no one cares. Or, they tell them they want an ambulance ride to another hospital. Humans are crazy. I've put this one before last time this topic came up. But I'll always remember it. Elderly woman calls 911 because she can't get out of her driveway because there are garbage cans blocking her driveway. RMP shows up and the cans were hers. All in order. My mom has been this person. She stepped outside to grab the mail and my brother, who was a toddler at the time, locked her out of the house. She ended up calling the fire department to break in the back window and unlock the door. I'm gonna flip this. I was the one calling about 7-10 years ago. I called the police on Christmas in my aunt's house and said I really like the police, and 15 minutes later a cop shows up and is like, what's the problem? And everyone's like, get down here now. I ended up being able to be in the front of a cop car and I turned the sirens on and off. Cousin was a 911 operator. Someone called to say they had nail gunned their hand to the wall 4 times. She sent the ambulance and then stayed on the phone with them in case they fainted. Cousin. So. 4 nails. You didn't decide to stop after the first? On phone. I was on a roll. Not me, but my dad. He is a firefighter, and one time the batteries were dying in the smoke detector, and when he found out what was wrong he asked the guy if he had a ladder, and his exact words were, I don't know. How the frick do you not know if you have a ladder? Not an operator, but my sister called 999 for a pizza in the 90s. They called back asking if everything was okay. Oh. I've heard sometimes they do that in case someone is in a situation where they're being monitored for what they say. And pretend to order a pizza. That way they can still provide their address and answer at least basic questions. Stupidest? That is like a daily occurrence, so it's hard to pinpoint. I was the dispatcher on a fire once that was started by a lady who tried to cremate her cat on the stove. She answered the door naked and acted as if nothing was wrong. Apartment neighbor called it in from smoke coming out underneath the door. Not 911 OP. This story comes from a friend of mine who is a captain at structural firefighting on a military airbase. This lady calls 911 and they roll out there because she said she cut herself, so they're thinking she's a cutter or something like that. So they get in the fire truck and roll out ambulance behind them, and the base MPs are also on the way. IT was a cut from a cardboard box.